Well, President Trump has claimed without evidence that the group of an estimated 7,000 migrants poses a national security threat. The migrants say that they're seeking asylum in the U.S. and Mexico to escape gang violence and extreme poverty in their home countries and Honduras and Guatemala. Reuters Pentagon correspondent Idrees Ali has been traveling with Secretary of Defense James Mattis. He joins us now from Washington. So, Idrees, the military has really historically stayed out of politics ahead of elections. So why are they taking this action now? What makes this situation different?
Well, I mean, that's the million-dollar question that we really haven't gotten an answer from the Trump administration. As you know, this caravan is at least a few weeks, if not more, away from the border, and it doesn't really have an imminent threat to this country at this point in time, at least. So the question of why it's happening now and why they're sort of rushing troops to the border is a good one. Former officials and experts that we've spoken to sort of point out the fact that it's a week before the midterm elections, and President Trump really himself has made the border and the caravan a big part of this election. So they're pointing towards the politics of this. Secretary Mattis, we spoke with him on Sunday coming back from Prague, and he sort of pointed out whatever or however many troops go to the border, they're going to work within this law that requires that troops on the border don't take part in law enforcement activities and are really in support of CBP officials. So the short answer is we don't really know why it's now, but experts really do point towards the political nature of such a deployment.
Idrees, I know, as you mentioned, you've been traveling with Secretary Mattis. There are some people who really believe that Mattis was going to be the one who was going to push against President Trump, would sign his resignation over this issue. Why hasn't he been more forceful?
Well, I will point out, last week when we did start hearing about, the potential for additional troops on the border, we were hearing about 800 to 1,000. And so this latest number of 5,000 is really a jump. It is a bit too early to tell why Secretary Mattis didn't push, or if he did push, how he pushed back. But at the end of the day, Secretary Mattis is a former Marine general, and he's someone who believes in the Constitution. And if the president says do something, he's more than likely to do it. And so, I mean, there are costs in the military to this, as we've discussed with Secretary Mattis. It takes away from training that these units would have been doing otherwise. It costs money, and the budget is something that the Pentagon is looking at, shrinking by 5% in the next year. Mm-hmm. So it's going to raise a lot of questions for the Pentagon. And again, we don't really have too many answers on why the Pentagon didn't push back or how they push back.
Mm-hmm. And, the president has said that the caravan is, in his words, an invasion, a threat to national security, but there hasn't been any hard evidence on this. Did the secretary say anything on this front?
He didn't mention it, but again, we walked sort of around the Pentagon yesterday, and we really couldn't find anyone who would characterize this caravan as a national security threat. Just for comparison's sakes, 5,200 active duty soldiers is about the same number of troops in Iraq, and if you add the National Guard component on the border, that's about as much as U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, where there's, large pockets of ISIS still fighting, and those really do provide or have a national security risk to the country. It's about half the number of troops in Afghanistan, and the security situation there keeps on deteriorating. So when you put it in that context, it's really tough to see how this is a national security threat in any way. Many of these migrants coming through the border, or the Mexican border at least, are women and children. They're on foot, and it's really tough to see how this is an imminent threat to the country.
What's the reasoning, would you say, for sending this many amount of troops? I mean, you're talking half the number of troops in Afghanistan. What will their mission be?
Well, so largely, again, they're going to be within the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits them from taking part in law enforcement activities. So they're really in a support role. So we've already seen some construction barriers and Jersey barriers move to the border. We know a lot of the troops that are going to be there are going to be building tents for the CBP officers. They're going to be flying in CBP officers from around the country and really assisting them. Why they need such a large number of troops is unclear. I mean, it is across 3 states, so you could make an argument that it's a large swath of land. But we already know that there are 2,100 National Guard troops assisting in this. And so, again, the facts don't seem to add up. And I think a lot of the arguments being made is that this seems to be a political decision more than one out of national security concerns.
Idrees Ali, Pentagon correspondent for Reuters, thank you so much.